or have implemented several sanctions under the Constitution and the Sanctions Code. However, it didn't stop there. What happened in 2011 by the restrict sanctions, but it also negatively developed the legislations in order to implement many other sanctions, especially those inflicting the right to nationality through many uses, either through the jurisdiction using the revoking of nationality, which was illegally used, whether through the royal legislations or by the illegal judgments which were issued by illegal prosecutions. The authorities intended to preparing the legislative environment to justify these violations which are against the Human Rights Convention and human rights in general. And that's why when we want to evaluate the performance of the authorities and how they dealt with the nationality rights and how it depended on several aspects in order to restrict this right so that to reach where we are now. For instance, revoking the nationality is being implemented through the illegal jurisdiction or jurisprudence in Bahrain. That's why tens of judgments are being issued against the human rights defenders through unjust prosecutions. So this is merely a revenge by the jurisdiction, and also the media, the official media, which the authorities depended on using the hatred speeches from the beginning through the media means, which asked for revoking the nationality and others, all the way to intense use of this choice, which is a political choice. On the other hand, there were awareness in the human rights world, which all the time discussed the right to obtain the nationality, and despite of this, the legislation in Bahrain and the security measures taken by the authorities through an ideologic targeting presents a lot of questions and discussions because it has a lot of complications and prospects on the social aspects, on the victims themselves who were deported illegally, in addition to the judicial review, which were useless in this. I'd like to welcome you again, and we shall begin with listening to the speakers, and afterwards, if anyone had any comments or questions, they might do that through the direct links. The first participant is Ms. Zahra Albarazi, who is a human rights defender in Hawiati. Thank you, and thank you for this chance to participate in this webinar, how the Bahraini authorities are exploiting the nationality to political targets, I'd like to start this webinar by a small introduction about the non-nationality in the region. And I'd also like to speak about this initiative of Hawiati, which is a new initiative. First of all, I'll start with the non-nationality. In the MENA region, we frequently hear about having no nationality, and we have many other terms used in this. In Bahrain, we also use the loss of nationality or someone deprived of nationality. For bidun, we use only the term bidun, who are also people deprived of their nationality. In Sham areas, we use the term stateless, and some people who don't have any nationalities are registered, recorded down as foreigners or stateless. There are a lot of terms. There are a lot of people in the region who don't have any nationality, but the term which unifies them is the non-nationality persons. As attorneys and as human rights defenders, we'd like to make a commonness and a cooperation between us and between these people. The history of the person who doesn't have any nationality, the definition, the legal definition, which is stated in the international law on the persons with no nationalities. There are two agreements on this in 1954 and in 1961. However, there is no MENA country which has certified any of these agreements on this very subject matter. There are no measures being implemented or even trying to implement such agreements, but the definition is out there about the term of no nationality in these agreements. In the MENA region, we have a big problem, which is the statistics. We have no idea on the actual big numbers of people with no nationality because we lack statistics. The UNHCR, which is the international organization by the UN, which is in charge for the people with no nationalities, introduced a number of 400,000 persons with no nationalities, but as field defenders in this, we are pretty sure that the number is way bigger because those people aren't recorded in any civil status register. It's very difficult to have any accurate statistics, and there is no authority or department in the region which implemented statistics or exercised any sort of practices to give accurate statistics. That's why we are pretty sure that the number is way more bigger, especially that we have the Palestinians who are in millions, who are also without any nationality, and they are not mentioned in the statistics. That's why this is a big problem in the region. There are a lot of reasons how a person can become a person with no nationality or even be born with no nationality. We have the unjust deprivation, which is in Bahrain, but there are also other reasons, like the foundation of a new country like southern of Sudan, as many people won't have the chance to obtain a nationality and therefore they would remain with no nationality. Also in the conflict regions, Conflicts always lead to many people having difficulty through displacement and proving who they are. And therefore, we have more numbers in people with no nationalities. There are impossible demands for nationalization. They are very difficult demands, like in the Gulf. There are other reasons that has to do with administrative measures, because probably they are finding it hard to access the documents. In addition to this, there's also the discrimination against the women based on the religion, race. As for the nationality law, this is mentioned, or we can find discrimination. All of these reasons lead to a lot of other numbers with people no nationalities. We can find all of these cases in the MENA region because we have conflicts, we have discrimination against women, discrimination based on religion, we have the administrative problems. Moreover, the persons with no nationality problem is that they get transferred from one generation to another, because the person with no nationality would pass the state of being, of giving their children the state of having no nationality. In Bahrain in particular, there are legal issues. We have discrimination against the woman. The Bahraini woman cannot transfer her nationality to her children, and it's impossible to obtain a nationality or to be a Bahraini national in Bahrain. We also have the Bidoon problem in Bahrain, and we also have the unjust decisions in Bahrain. I'm about to finish or to wrap up. Before I give the floor for the other speakers, I just want to mention that through Hawiati, we face a lot of problems. The groups who have no nationality in the region, a lot of them came together and founded a network named Hawiati. It's a network which deals with and is targeted for the people who deal with the persons with no nationality in the region, the researchers, the human rights defenders concerned in this subject. We are a new network, but our main target is to end the cases of no nationality persons and protect those people and protect their rights, and also to have solidarity with other groups of people who don't have any nationality in the region. So you can follow us and follow our news online. I can share later on through Twitter or Facebook, Hawiati. Thank you so much. This is a brief introduction before we go into details about Bahrain. Thank you a lot. Later on, we're going to have more detailed discussion. I'm trying to just wrap up the time because we have around 10 speakers and each one of them has about 10 minutes. Now we're going to listen to Mr. Devin Kenney, who is a researcher at the Gulf Matters at Amnesty International. Thank you, Mrs. Zahra.
Devin.
ماشي الحال؟
لازم أسمع بالسمعات الخارجية بس ما فيني أحكي وهو مرتبطة مش مشكل. طيب فأنا سوف شكرا أستاذ باقر.
Thank you, Mr. Baqer. I'm gonna answer quickly 3 questions chosen by Mr. Jawad. The first one, how did Amnesty International dealt with the file of revoking nationality in Bahrain? Amnesty International gives a high priority for the file of revoking the nationality in any country because depriving a person of his nationality is a grave violation which leads to having a person with no nationality and therefore depriving him of other rights, whether political, economic, or social. Amnesty International published tens of reports on the Bahrain in particular, and according to our adopted methodology, we try to broadcast every report through the international media and the diplomatic parties which also have relations with Bahrain. We can't cover every aspect of revoking the nationality, especially like the specific cases which have judgments issued without any publication, but in general we tried to cover the group revocation of the nationality which happened in 2011. The second question is, what would you recommend for NGOs or for those people who were deprived of their nationality to regain their nationality? My advice for the victims must preserve any documents he has, whether they were written, especially for the reasons, the justifications, the government which were given to him, because documents are your weapon. Through some sources in Bahrain, I hear that some people didn't ask for their original documents that has to do with their lawsuits. Personally, I had a discussion with a local government in the US as for the amount of taxes that I owe them. And through my experience, I asked them for details, a written report for every phase and every procedure, and I'm gonna keep these documents until the day I die, because I believe that these documents, that these information are the tools and the weapons to defend my position, whether before any court or even personal wise. So as for the victims of people with no nationality, I advise them, in order to defend their rights to nationality, is to document every action of the government and how they have dealt with them so far. As for the NGOs, I have a similar idea. The value of the NGOs is to what extent they document the cases. Just condemning the actions of the governments isn't enough, like in the case of Bahrain. So the aim of any report is to advocate internationally so that more people would access this matter internationally and thus helping. The third question is, how can you benefit from the human rights mechanisms or measures to exercise pressure on Bahrain to stop measures of revoking nationality and to give it back to those who were revoked from. I believe that we have maximum benefited from the UN offices because they have sent a lot of letters to Bahrain, more than any other country. I have met personally with one of or several employees in these offices, and they have notified me on this. And you can check their website, the special rapporteurs in the United Nations, and you can check out the many letters that were sent to Bahrain. If that was enough to change the policies of Bahrain, then we would have actually sensed more results considering the many complaints. So personally, I believe that the international measures aren't enough without the field work in any country if we actually want to see change. Can check the people who changed their governments based on international condemnation. The international condemnation actually may have an effect or an impact, but to an extent, and exercise more pressure on a government, but the basis of change is locally, and we cannot wait the United Nations rapporteurs or even the Human Rights Council or any other higher council to solve the problems which are going on in Bahrain. And I'm not saying that we should stop every practice United Nations wise, but we must confess that deciding the decisions or the policies doesn't come from the outside. These are my remarks. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Devin. And he's accurate in his speech. The third speaker is Mr. Fadi Al-Qadi, who is a MENA human rights defender and civil society expert. Welcome, Mr. Fadi. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Baqer. I would be more accurate in the 7 minutes speech. We must be very clear and accurate. There is a difference, a core difference about speaking on the status of having no nationality in the region or even in Bahrain. Several reasons, as our colleague spoke about that. I'm Palestinian and I know exactly the Gaza people who are in Lebanon or in Jordan without any nationality. We are speaking about what's going on in Bahrain to be clear enough. That we are facing a practice to attack the peaceful opposition, to eradicate any criticism which aims at enhancing or promoting the human rights or enabling the people to obtain their human rights. So basically, we're not just talking about displacement from one country or another, which caused the no nationality state. We are specifically saying the unjust practices methodologically being used because the authorities and the government sought legislation as one of their tools, or misuse of laws, or misuse of using the laws, or the jurisprudence. So we can't actually look at this matter in general. We should be more specific, and diagnosing it this way is very important because it has a lot of consequences. One of these consequences, I believe, is two matters. First, we as activists, as Bahraini activists or peaceful criticizers, if God helps, we had our nationality revoked by any court, what can we do? What can the victim of nationality revocation can do? First, we have to speak about what's available from the tools, and I believe there are at their minimum levels, especially in Bahrain. This is also connected to the political platform, which is being restricted at its maximum. Also, we are speaking of the role of the civil organizations and not only the NGOs who are advocating or trying to make it up for the damages. I believe local-wise in Bahrain this isn't possible, and my colleague at Amnesty International was right when he said that working international-wise, this matter through the international mechanisms of the United Nations, I want to be more frank. I'm no employee for anyone. This speech has actually warned us for activists in the human rights field. Using these measures is important. However, its importance isn't as important as the three following points. First, we should develop the documentation part. We are not just talking about the documentation for the sake of monitoring what the authorities are doing, but also to bring the nationality back from the people who were deprived from, because the people who were revoked from their nationalities are deprived of being or of practicing their minimum human rights, not only political-wise but social-wise. For instance, if you don't have a national if you don't have a national number in Bahrain, you won't be able to access any treatment for corona or COVID-19. You won't be able to supply other goods. So if you took away or deprived any person his membership card, the nationality in this context, then you have deprived him of all of his rights. The governments don't understand this, and it's easy for them to practice several tools or weapons like almost nuclear weapons. And this person who was deprived of his nationality would have difficulty to continue on living. We should document when this person was deprived and how and why. The other point is to keep any documents you have, like the birth certificate, copies of passports. These are just examples. Any legal contracts you have, to have a full file, complete file to an extent, in hopes that we would be able to use it one day to actually stop the damage or compensate for the occurring damage. I believe that the activists in Bahrain and NGOs in Bahrain to try to address this subject before the international forums, the civil forums like in European countries, the civil society in North America, and form new allies for such a subject matter, and to diminish the local expenses. I don't want to subject or to risk any other person of revoking their nationalities for any person. So of what we have, I believe that there is another matter that we can take it into consideration. The idea of providing legal assistance or advice, I think it's limited to an extent to provide any legal advice to the victims who had their nationalities revoked, starting by helping them in preparing the files if the persons were deported, which is the most dangerous, to help them to an extent. Thank you, Mr. Baqer. Thank you, Mr. Fadi, for this realistic perspective, and thank you for taking into consideration the time that you had. Now the platform is for Mr. or for Mrs. Ebtisam Sayegh, a human rights defender in Salam organization, who shall discuss the social impacts to the decisions of revoking the nationality in Bahrain. Hello, as for revoking the nationality, we lack, or it represents for a human person an actual execution. It's just as killing a person in every circumstance, and it's a continuous torture. And since I was in contact with a lot of families who had their nationals revoked in Bahrain, not only during this period but also before, against opponents or anyone criticizing the authorities who have different opinions in Bahrain. As for the impact, it has a direct impact against the victim himself or herself. It starts from the moment this judgment is issued. He believes to be a non-existent person, as if his name was deleted from any records in the official departments and thus lost any civil rights he has. And he feels as if he's treated not even as a foreigner. A foreigner person would have some rights, but this person doesn't enjoy such rights. In addition, he would be at risk of being arrested at any time. And since he doesn't have any nationality, therefore, the difficulty lies that the civil record would be changed from a Bahraini national to a bidun, or a person with no nationality. This is a huge complication. We have monitored a lot of cases of accounts where seized, their pension, were also deprived from a lot of privileges which they had before, had as nationals. All of them were revoked down, as allowances, as housing loans, and any sort of political rights. The other impact is the social impact. This person, for the society, a person with no nationality, they would deal with him with cautiousness. The whole family would fear that they would be next targeted and their nationalities would be revoked at any time. Mr. Devin has mentioned that why don't they have any files as for their cases or their arrests or their lawsuits for revoking their nationalities. They cannot access any identification documents because at the moment that they want to discuss any of these departments or authorities, they would tell them you are not the competent authorities that you can refer to. So where are the competent authorities where they can complain against or object to the judgment of revoking nationality? The other impact doesn't only impact the victim himself, but also all of his family. When his nationality is revoked, then any child being born after the judgment of revoking the nationality would also be born without a nationality. Also, they might be at risk of being deported at any time from Bahrain. The housing loan might be cancelled even if they waited it for years for it. Even other rights in the community, he's not feeling like he's welcomed, and he's also at fear of being arrested at any of the checkpoints. We have a lot of cases that one of the cases that she wanted to go to the pharmacy or to the hospital, but on her way she had a checkpoint, and because he didn't have a nationality, he was arrested and jailed, and he has to pay a fine in order to be freed. Like Mr. Ebrahim Karimi, whenever he would go out, he would feel distressed. So revoking the nationality is a very cruel punishment. Even it's a huge list, over 500 person. There was a decision to re-give the nationality back. Not all of them were given their nationalities back. Only 7 persons we communicated with were given their nationalities back. They had to pay several visits for the immigration departments in order to be able to issue a new passport for them. And they also fear that this new passport has limited access or limited rights, that they even be targeted in the future. They don't feel safe because there's no law or anything which can guarantee that they would have their nationality revoked, thus violating human rights. Our activists are fearing this cruel punishment or sanction because it has a lot of prospects, because after revoking the nationality, if deportation happens, sometimes the person who had his nationality revoked would receive a phone call that he's going to sign some papers, then he would be jailed, and afterwards he would be deported. He wouldn't be able to say goodbye even for his family or his children. We have a lot of cases of people who were deported. They have left their families behind and they can't communicate with them due to this deportation. Can you imagine that a person who has lived more than 40 years in his own country, leaving his country without any single document or money? He's only permitted to hold a small bag with one uniform, and he doesn't have access to any of the retirement salaries. This is very cruel. A lot of activists are documenting, but they are finding that this documentation isn't actual useful and isn't actual changing the reality. But we hope that in the coming phase there will be justice for people who had their nationalities revoked and to gain their nationalities again, because its consequences are devastating. Imagine a baby who was just born without nationality, can't access any health care because he is a non-Bahraini, whereas there are a lot of other babies who are accessing health care just because they hold a nationality. We shall fight for this issue because it has grave impacts on the families. We hope the whole world will hear us, and also the mature people around the world who are working against the cruelty in this world and trying to help those people who had their nationalities revoked, because this is immoral execution for the persons. Thank you so much for Mrs. Ebtisam Sayegh, which in reality it's mentioned the daily suffering for the victims of the revoking of nationality, which has a lot of impacts and consequences on the family and on the environment and the community, and the daily suffering for these victims who loses a lot of rights and who suffer a lot of problems in hospitals and universities. Also, they suffer from a lot of economic problems. Now we're gonna listen to Mrs. Fatima Yazbek, who is a researcher at the Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Welcome, Mrs. Fatima. Thank you, Mr. Baqer, and thank you, the other speakers. I would speak about some of the international laws. The right of the person to gain or to hold a nationality is a right guaranteed by the international conventions, the international law on human rights, the international agreement on eliminating discrimination, the Child International Agreement, and the agreement against non-discrimination against women, the People with Disabilities International Agreements, and the agreement to immigrants protection. Also, the nationality subject is being mentioned in a lot of other agreements, especially those which had to do with refugees. The article in the international law that no person is allowed to be prohibited from their nationality, and it's prohibited that any person is unjustly prohibited from their nationality. The state cannot absolutely state or choose that I'd like this person or another person being one of my nationals, but the other person, for instance, I don't want him to be a national of mine. the states and governments must comply to the human rights aspects when giving the nationalities. In the international conventions, we have two parallel lines: the right to keep the nationality also is in parallel with the prohibition on revoking any nationality. So, in addition to many reports issued in these aspects, however, we find that the Bahraini authorities don't take any of these international laws, any of these agreements or conventions, don't take them into consideration, neither the demands, and insist on these cruel practices, unjust practices against the opposition or the human rights defenders. This is internationally condemned, and these coercive decisions of revoking the nationalities are condemned by the international states, even by some of the country allies with Bahrain, and they demand them to stop such practices. I would mention some examples. International-wise, in 2017, more than 137 recommendations were issued, were concerned on the coercive revocation of the nationality in Bahrain. Germany recommended to amend the law. Belgium also recommended to not revoke the nationality coercively, neither deport the people who had their nationalities revoked. Uganda also recommended to issue a new law to treat this issue and also treat the matter of domestic workers. Denmark also recommended that a lot of persons with no nationalities were deprived from their least rights, as mentioned by Mrs. Ebtisam and Mr. Fadi before, and even more. Czech Republic recommended to stop the religion discrimination and stop the torture, especially in the case of revocation of the nationality. When Bahrain decides to revoke a nationality of one of the opponents, it leaves them without a nationality. Then in this case, all of these people who were deprived from their nationality don't have any other nationality. Mexico also recommended to issue a law against the torture. Also, other international attitudes by some of the delegates. In November 2011, the spokeswoman for the U.S. Treasury, Victoria Nuland, we have asked Bahrain always to reform and to do a peaceful change, and she considered that the revoking nationality judgment should be appealed before the courts, and we wanted a transparent process. And as Mrs. Ebtisam has mentioned, even the decisions to give the nationalities back to the people who had lost their nationals or those who were nationalities revoked weren't taken into consideration. Sheikh Isa Al-Qasim, the UNHCR, in his matter expressed its worry about the extra restrictions against him, especially when revoking the nationality, and it stated that no legal procedures or measures were adopted, and the revoking nationality, it should be legitimately met. And in June 2013, the European Union also stated and recommended that the Bahraini authorities withdraw the decision of revoking the nationality and to comply by the international laws. Also, another one asked the Bahraini authorities to asked them to stop the decisions of revoking the nationality of their nationals, and in April 2014 they were asked to take the decisions of revoking nationalities not based on the discrimination of religion or race. And Michelle Bachelet, the UN reporter, said that revoking the nationality deprives people from accessing health care and access to education. This is only examples of international opinions around the world condemning the decisions taken by the Bahraini authorities in revoking the nationality. However, the Bahraini authorities don't take any of these recommendations into consideration and continues on violating the minimal rights of its nationals just because they have expressed their political opinion or participating in the political life. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Fatima. A lot of speakers spoke about the many prospects of revoking the nationality. Now we shall stay with a short movie on this subject. And then we have 5 more speakers who, some of them are victims of revoking the nationality. They will speak about their own experiences. Now we shall remain with this short movie.
التي تنضوي حكومة البحرين تحت لوائها.
إلى يومنا هذا لم يصدر أي خطاب رسمي ولم أبلغ بأسباب إسقاط الجنسية.
مسلسل الإعدامات المعنوية للكثير من البحرينيين لم يقف عند حد تجريدهم من جنسياتهم فحسب، بل استكمل من قبل سلطات بلادهم ليطال حتى حرمانهم من مورد رزقهم عبر ممارسة الضغوط على المؤسسات المشغلة لهم لإيقافهم عن العمل.
حيث أخبرني رئيس الجامعة بأن هناك ضغوط من مكتب وزير التربية بإيقافي عن العمل. تم تجميد جميع حقوقي.
وبعكس ادعاءات السلطات البحرينية بأن مفاعيل إسقاط الجنسية شخصية حصرا، فقد أثبتت الوقائع أن آثار هذا العقاب لا يمكن تعدادها أو حصرها بشخص المسقطة جنسيته فحسب، بل هي تنعكس على كل مناحي حياته وجميع أفراد عائلته الذين يحرمون معه استنادا لقرار مجحف من كل الخدمات الرسمية، ما يجسد أبشع صورة عقاب جماعي عرفه التاريخ البحريني.
ينص مرسوم إسقاط الجنسية على أنه قرار يشملني أنا فقط، أما الواقع فهو عقاب جماعي بعد أن يطبق علي قانون الأجانب وأجبر على ترك الوطن تتشتت أسرتي.
عقاب تمادت حكومة البحرين في تنفيذه عبر اللجوء إلى تطبيق قانون إقامة الأجانب بحق المسقطة جنسياتهم، بترحيلهم عن بلدهم الأم بالاستناد إلى واقع استولدته بشكل غير قانوني لتبني عليه مقتضى أحكامها الباطلة بالترحيل.
بعد رفض الطعن المقدم من قبلي، تم الحكم النهائي بإبعادي من الوطن. خلال أقل من 24 ساعة من صدور الحكم النهائي تم التواصل معي والضغط علي للحضور إلى إدارة الهجرة والجوازات، وتم أخذي إلى المطار وإبعادي في نفس الليلة.
استخدام الحكومة البحرينية لسلاح القمع السياسي هذا بات اليوم يهدد جميع البحرينيين، بعدما أضحى أي مواطن بحريني عرضة لأن يجد نفسه فجأة بلا جنسية وبلا هوية وبلا وطن.
أناشد المجتمع الدولي أن يتحركوا ويضغطوا على الأنظمة التي تمارس هكذا عقاب.
إزاء ذلك بات من الملح على الجميع أن يتحرك لإلزام حكومة البحرين باحترام المعاهدات الدولية التي وقعت عليها والتي تضمن حق المواطن بالحصول على الجنسية، وذلك عبر إلغاء عقوبة الحرمان منها ومنع استخدامها كأداة سياسية والتراجع عن قراراتها السابقة بهذا الصدد، وإلا فإن قوائم المسقطة جنسياتهم ستطول أكثر فأكثر، والظلم اللاحق بالبحرينيين سيتفاقم بشكل أكبر.
مرحبا بكم من جديد، ونعتذر للخلل التقني في بداية عرض هذا الفيلم. الآن طبعا لدينا 5 متحدثين بالإضافة إلى مداخل الأخ أحمد جابر. نبدأ الآن مع الأستاذ إبراهيم سرحان المستشار.
Mr. Ebrahim Sarhan, the legal advisor at Salam for Democracy and Human Rights. Good evening. In reality, I would mention some of the legal points in the law of nationality if considering that the nationality has a political frame and the scope of the state, and in the constitutional law it doesn't mention that in order to have a nationality then you have to be loyal to the ruler or to any ruling party. In Bahrain, the problem lies in the constitution of 2002. especially in Article 17, the Bahraini nationality is specified by a law and it shouldn't be revoked from the nationals. If the article was restricted only to this, then this would be fine. However, when this article had another phrase added, which is, and other cases to be determined by the law, then
أستاذ إبراهيم
إذا الصوت غير واضح.
كان فقط يتقطع شوي الصورة أيضا.
عموما لو اتفقت المادة الدستورية عند هذا الحد
if this legal article was only restricted to this, this would have been fine. However, when this constitutional article mentioned the phrase other cases to be determined by law, here it means that it gave the opportunity for the legislator, for any legislator, to mention any future cases which will give him the plea to revoke the nationality in the future.
وهنا أيضا يعني المسألة قانون الجنسية في البحرين.
The issue of the nationality in Bahrain.
في عام 1937
in 1937, the nationality law in Bahrain was of the most beautiful legislated laws. However, in 1963, changes in the nationality laws started, which gave the chance or paved the way for having the nationality law in Bahrain diminish the privileges or gave the privilege in changing this fact to the ruler or to the emir when the foreign wife of a Bahraini started by depriving her from obtaining the nationality. This is where the issue has started. If we go from 1963 to all the way to 2013, we find that when there was a political crisis in Bahrain, some changes in the laws were being implemented. As protecting the society from terrorist attacks or terrorist acts. No article was mentioned on revoking the nationality in case any person was convicted by this law. However, in July 2013, a decree law was issued, not by the parliament, but the king himself, number 20. He added Article 24, which states that the criminal judge, when he judges upon any sanction related to terrorism, he should therefore judge upon revoking the nationality And this is a due obligation on the judge. And at the end of this article, he added the following phrase or a following constitutional term, that the judgment issued by revoking the nationality shall not be implemented unless the king of the country approves it. In fact, there are two sanctions in the criminal law in Bahrain which are not implemented unless by the approval of the King of Bahrain, which is the execution and the sanction of revoking the nationality. This condition or this term was embarrassing to an extent because the king must sign these judgments of revoking the nationalities, or else they wouldn't be implemented, they would be invalid. As we hear from some victims that the Bahraini authorities implemented the legal consequences, knowing that the king didn't approve yet these judgments. In 2014, Law 21 these powers were restricted by the milk and by the king.
الأحكام القضائية أو القرارات الإدارية الصادرة من الحكومة تكون مسببة. لو نظرنا للمادة 8.
And he tried to consider that the governmental decisions are reasonable, are reasoning.
الملك وهي من صلاحيات الملك، ولكن جعل بناء على عرض وزير الداخلية ووضع بعض الشروط. هذه في القانون نسميها محاولة إلى جعل الإجراءات الشكلية.
So it's an attempt to make the formal measures
سعة إلى السلطة التنفيذية
more broad before the executive authorities and less prone to the judicial monitoring, and with more powers being invested for the king. And in 2019, a decree of law number 16 cancelled the Article 24, which stated that the judgments are issued by the criminal judge, that when he judges upon any article related to protecting the community against any terrorist acts, these powers were transferred to the Minister of the Interior, at first through the cabinet. This article states that the constitutional guarantee was lost through this article. Before, it had to do with a grave betrayal for the country, and the king should have approved this judgment. However, now the article which was amended in article number 10 gave powers to the Minister of the Interior at first to have the right to revoke the nationality, which predicts a more dark and more cruel future, to have absolute powers by the Minister of the Interior, who would revenge politicians or take revenge at the opponents and the opposition. Through this article, he permitted or gave permission that the Minister of Interior, by a decision taken by the cabinet based on the review presented by the Minister of Interior, of course with some mentioned terms which were previously mentioned in the law of nationality, and added to them in which he transferred the power from the judge to the Minister of Interior, along with the approval of the king, in which the king approved more than 500 judgments. And in this article, he stated that this decision can be taken without the approval or the certification of the king himself, just by the Minister of the Interior. This decision, issued by the Minister of Interior, has a security aspect, which was also mentioned by the speakers, by Dr. Masoud, and also mentioned in the short movie which we saw. They appealed before the jurisdiction. However, the jurisdiction rejected them because he considers them with security aspects, and therefore he doesn't have the competency to review them. This is where difficulty occurs. So unless Article 17 in the Constitution is amended, we can't have the decision to give a nationality or revoke it given to a regular legislator. I shall stop here and I can answer any questions you have later. Thank you, Mr. Ebrahim. Now we shall be with Mrs. Asma Darwish, the researcher at the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights. Hello, thank you for having me. Can you see me?
اوكي هلا اسكره وافتحها من جديد. اوكي يبدو في مشكلة في الفيديو عندي. لا اوكي تمام. اوكي بخصوص موضوع اسقاط الجنسية يعني
As for the issue of revoking the nationality, the other participants have gave sufficient information. However, I shall add a few points. Might be new or even a repetition. We always knew that the Bahraini authorities were successful to an extent in bringing out arbitrary tools and facing the opponents, thus criticizing its policies. Of the most dangerous tools it used is having more powers in revoking the nationality. So those who won't change in Bahrain don't just risk torture or being arrested, but also risks being revoked of their nationality and deported to an unknown or anonymous future. All the procedures done in Bahrain weren't legal, and even if they were legal, the human rights defenders are fighting to revoke down these procedures because it's almost like executing the persons but without killing them. So the amendments which were done to the nationality Bahraini law, which gives additional powers to the Ministry of Interior in revoking the nationality if it considers one of the Bahraini national isn't loyal to its country. This is a very ambiguous text with a very broad aspect. It's not clear, and it can be exploited to punish those who criticize the government. It's very clear for everyone and the human rights defenders in Bahrain that the legal system failed at justice in most of the times, especially in the recent amendments to the law of anti-terrorism. This led to revoking nationalities arbitrary, and this is a grave violation for the international law. Most of the times, peaceful protesting were considered as terrorist acts. Those who were criticizing the governments were asking for a republic regime in the Bahrain, for instance. As my colleague Ebtisam mentioned, those stateless don't have residence permits, and therefore they have similar lawsuits as refugees or immigrants, domestic workers. There are no special laws for the stateless in Bahrain. Those who have their nationalities revoked cannot extract any passports or identity cards for their new babies who were born after their nationalities were revoked. Of course, in the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights, we have recommended in several reports on this concern that Bahrain must cancel the laws which permit the authorities in revoking the nationality, especially if they were based on ambiguous, illegal prosecutions taken by confessions which were taken out through torture, and therefore taking all the rights of ripping. And we ask the government to give the nationality back to those persons who were revoked from their nationalities, to more than 400 persons. In a final monitoring for Bahrain Forum for Human Rights, we have documented arresting a child two children who were 16 years old, who through social media tweeted after the death of the Bahraini head of cabinet. They arrested these two children in addition to 4 other women, which makes it obvious that Bahraini authorities would punish furthermore anyone who criticizes them or anyone who asks for change. It also keeps on restricting the freedom of expression and opinion. We at the Bahrain Forum for Human Rights want change in the country. We look forward for a better future where everyone lives in a respectful livelihood, where human rights are respected. We also encourage the reconciliation and true reform in Bahrain and between different parties. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Asma Darwish, the researcher at Bahrain Forum for Human Rights. Now, we shall be with Mr. Mohammed Sultan for the advocacy chief at Salam organization. Thank you, dear Baqer. And thank you for organizing this webinar, and I'm glad for everyone participating in this extremely important subject. I shall point out to a technical point in this matter, since this subject is highly important. At Salam Organization for Democracy and Human Rights, we have founded a website on this very matter in revoking nationality. Its name is Ana Bahraini, I am Bahraini. I'm gonna close my screen so that you can check the website. Can you view my screen? Yes, it's clear. This is the website, and it also has its name in English, أنا بحريني, I am Bahraini. This website targets at defending and supporting the Bahrainis who had their nationalities revoked for political reasons because they demanded change for democracy and human rights. Also, this website aims at also trying to solve the problem mentioned by Mrs. Zahra, which is the statistics, because it documents the persons who lost or who had their nationalities revoked during the years in 2015. There were 308 in 2018, 398 in year 2017, 156, and so on. This website facilitates the researchers, the specialists at research centers to access the information, and also for the media and anyone who's interested in this field or in this subject. Also, I'm going to show you a bit. It has two languages, in English and in Arabic. And also for archives for future, if we view the lists of victims and names, you can see the names in 2012, the names, 31 persons who had their nationalities revoked. In 2014, the names, everyone who had their nationalities revoked are documented in this website by mentioning their names, the dates, as well as the important reports which were issued by NGOs, not only Salam, any NGO which issued reports on the revocation of nationalities in Bahrain are mentioned in this website. So anyone interested or any researcher can access the website and check these reports, as well as any other statements, any articles by Bahraini media, whether the decision was taken by a royal decree or by the Minister of the Interior. You can check it on this website. Also, Amnesty International, you can view any statements or reports which it issued in 2020. There is also a video related on this subject. I just wanted you to check this website. Thank you so much. Now we shall check some personal experiences on revocation of nationality. Mr. Ali Abdul Emam is one of the victims who was also a human rights defender. Welcome, Mr. Ali. The platform is yours. Thank you for allowing me to participate. I will not take a lot of time, but as my personal experience, what did it mean for me having my nationality revoked? As Mrs. Ebtisam mentioned, after 40 years of living in a country, you discover that you are deleted or cancelled from this country. You don't have any records. Even if anyone wanted to check your personal record or register, he will discover that he has a lot of restrictions. Only those people with clearance who can check your file. As for me, it didn't start with me personally. My mother is Iranian nationality. She came to Bahrain in the 50s. In 2002, she didn't obtain any nationality, although she's married to a Bahraini, although the law used to state that the foreign wife has the right to obtain a nationality within 5 years. She was there even before the nationality law was issued. And after the convention, she was able to obtain the nationality. As for the stateless person, or the problem in giving nationalities in Bahrain isn't a new matter, it's old. There's another important point. The revocation nationality doesn't only happen in Bahrain, but also in the Emirates and other countries. As for a stateless person, I don't know what claims or what charges are being charged against me. I only saw the law with 2 languages, with a list of charges also, which was issued after hours of being informed. But I don't know what are the charges accusing me. I didn't have any prosecution or trial. Until now, I wasn't officially informed that my nationality was revoked. I found my name mentioned in the website of Anba al-Bahrain. Officially, I wasn't informed that my nationality was revoked. Also, I had 2 newborns outside the Bahrain, but 2 of my newborns don't have the right to obtain the nationality. I suffered in the UK because I wasn't able to obtain them nationalities. One of my babies was born as a stateless, as a bidun, for 1.5 years until I was able to obtain him a nationality by virtue of an exception by the Minister of the Interior, because you cannot grant a nationality, another nationality in Europe, if you don't have an original nationality. You have to fit the standards. One also of my babies was born here in Bahrain without any nationality. The final point I'd like to point out is the impact of revocation of nationality trespassed me personally. I tried to organize a general proxy to finalize some transactions, like that has to do with inheritance or a car or something. I did a general power of attorney when it reached the Foreign Affairs Ministry for certification, and they told me that they would call me back. It was 5 years ago, but I never received a phone call. So it's not only limited to them taking me the nationality. Even if I obtained another nationality, they are prohibiting me from finalizing any transactions in my homeland country. Another point, there is the retirement salaries. The king issued a decree that those with no nationalities, revoked nationalities, have no retirement salaries. So for 20 years I've been working. I lost my retirement salaries. I'm not entitled to get them due to the king decree. At the end, I'd like to point out that the problem of revocation of nationality, it's very difficult to explain for my children how I am a Bahraini national. However, I don't hold the nationality. How can you defend your country like this? What can you do about resisting such a decision? You discover that you're restricted to a very big extent. Even explaining to your children this fact is very difficult. At the end, there is a very interesting book, Ali Al-Batari, about stripping the nationality, can describe the suffering of the families who had their nationalities revoked. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ali Abdul Emam, who's one of the victims for the arbitrary decisions and sanctions. What he mentioned clarifies how using the sanction of revocation of nationality doesn't stop at just judging, or it's a continuous sanction. And he also mentioned one of the bizarre actions when revoking the nationality, that the victim may be informed by the decision not officially but through any media means. Now we're gonna hear Mr. Ebrahim Karimi, who is also a human rights defender and also one of the victims of the nationality revocation and coercive and arbitrary deportation. Good evening. Most of the speakers mentioned most of the points which I wanted to point out, but I'm going to be more personal. I was deported from 1982. My nationality was revoked for the first time without any trials or jurisdiction. After being arrested and tortured in the prison for 3 months, they took me to the ship and then to Iran and then to the exile for 25 years. After around 25 years, we came back and we were harassed by the government because they considered us the opposition who were coming from the outside, and even going around the Gulf countries we were harassed. In 2011, you remember the events or incidents which occurred, and I was arrested or jailed for 1 year, and I was declared innocent by the end of the year after appealing the judgment. And after 6 months in 2012, as Mr. Ali mentioned, I heard the judgment of revocation of nationality through the TV. We spoke to the attorney on this subject matter and to delegate him. And delegating an attorney, we need to do a proxy or a power of attorney, but the court refused to facilitate the legal procedures. So through some pressures exercised by the Amnesty on the Ministry of Justice, they approved giving us a proxy for the attorney to defend us before the court. This is a very important point, that the human rights NGO in this matter helped. So we asked the different NGOs to keep on exercising pressures on the Bahraini government. Despite that, Mr. Devin said that the statements and slogans may not be so beneficial, but this thing would be helpful. We have gone through all the legal phases through the attorney, Mr. Ebrahim Sarhan, the legal advisor, can discuss the legal procedures which we go through because the laws of the country are very complicated and very hard to know. In 2015, I was arrested once again because of a tweet, and I was convicted for 2 years and 1 month, and I was trialed and jailed at the same time, where Mr. Mohammed was defending me before the court, and a judgment was issued to deport me. And there wasn't possible to delegate someone to guarantee me or to be my guarantor in Bahrain. This wasn't possible before, and they didn't give us any chance to look for a guarantor. The suffering before the deportation was mentioned by many speakers, especially with what has to do with the families. As Ms. Ebtisam said, it's just like execution. Excuse me for being affected, but the exiling and the deportation is just as killing one person. It's like amputation of someone. It's just as killing someone. So revocation of the nationality, it's just like beheading us, and we really suffered inside Bahrain. First of all, economic-wise, as Fadi mentioned, we had a lot of economic problems, like social security, or the rights for the people who already own countries or companies or other. The economic impacts also extend to the social impacts and to our children. Its impacts were very difficult on my children, on my family, very negative wise. This was in Bahrain, and when the exile happened, I was in the jail. They gave me a nationality where they wrote in it, residing in Bahrain, and the validity of the passport is 1 year. This passport isn't considered legal at any country. They exiled me from the Bahrain airport to the airport of Najaf, except for Iraqis who accepted due to the security situation which was going on in Iraq. In Iraq, I moved to Iran. Iranian took us in as humanitarian wise. In other cases, Iran wouldn't accept those exiled directly from Bahrain to Iran. And because we also stated that the Iraq situation isn't stable to live in, we live in Iran, but we still suffer economic-wise, the dollar situation. At the end, we are Bahraini nationals, and Iran isn't our country. And we never thought of actually living there forever and forget our country, Bahrain. So we ask any activists who communicate with NGOs, human rights organizations, foundations, or anyone who can exercise pressure on the Bahraini government to stop the revocation of Bahrain and the deportation. Deportation is much more difficult than also revocation of the nationality, because the family would be dismantled, everyone would be living in separate countries, and suffering would be in different aspects, economically, socially, emotionally, etc. So this is in brief my personal experience and suffering with the courts and the jail and the deportation. The exile, we hope to go to another country or to go back to our country or to solve our issue in one way or another and not to be forgotten. So everyone who has good connections outside, if they can keep on working on this matter. This is in brief, and I hope I mentioned most of the important points. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ebrahim. One of the main aspects in the case of Mr. Ebrahim is using all the legal procedures, and despite that, he followed some of the legal procedures after the judgment was issued. However, they justified that, and the judgment was implemented and also subjected Mr. Ebrahim to other violations before being arbitrarily deported to the exile. Now we have a final intervention by Mr. Ahmed Jabir, and afterwards, if anyone has any questions or comments before we finalize this webinar. Mr. Ahmed, are you there? Good evening. I will make it brief. My name is Ahmed. I'm from Kuwait, from the Stateless. I was born as a Bidun. This would enable me maybe to reflect the experience of a person who is deprived from a nationality, because I was born without a nationality, and also it affected me as a brother for a Bidun, a father for Bidun children, a husband for a Bidun wife. So the revocation or the statelessness differs in impacts or in form the revocation of the nationality, but they both have similar impacts at the end. Anyone with no nationality or being deprived of a nationality, as Mr. Devin has mentioned, has similar impacts, being deprived of human rights, education, health, housing, and also the core human rights and political expression, because the dignity of the person is preserved to be a part of making or being a part of legislations which shall govern him, or else it would be like slavery when someone is being governed with legislations against his own will. As for the revocation of nationality, deprivation of the nationality, I'll probably repeat what the other speaker said. It's an illegal practice violating the human rights law, also violating the constitution in Kuwait, because in Kuwait there's a persistence from the authorities which govern or have control over the nationality matter, which actually benefit from depriving nationalities for some categories of people. So the nationality is being used as a discrimination tool for race or religion. As Bidun, we believe that we were deprived from our nationality for race, because they do say that, oh, you come from north, most of you are Shia. We also believe that we were deprived from the nationality in Kuwait as a practice by the dominating political authority or party in Kuwait to take over the wealth and the human and health resources are being exploited by the system which is known as nationality. We saw that in our experience since 1965 until 1985. This is documented by testimonies from the heads of the council, ministers, that the authority in Kuwait's government since 1965 until the 1985 exploits the Bidun. They would register them before the UN as nationals. However, it wouldn't treat them as Kuwaiti nationals. This is for geopolitical reasons, because Kuwait was acknowledged as a state, that its geographical borders, our ancestors who live in the desert, their rights were used by the Kuwaiti government to be acknowledged as a state. However, they were neglected their nationality. Point 3, the nationality is being used as a revenge tool in Kuwait. We saw how the opposition in Kuwait, and I'd like to mention there's a minority which takes over the political decision in the government, exploits it and uses it as a revenge tool against the opposition. So what happens with the opposition during the 80s, after the attack, or the recent period, which with the Arab Spring, and recently, in the last year, some of the pro-rights of Bidun, the head of the council, represents one of the excluding parties in the country, an extremist party. Although we don't have actual parties, but we can give him this that he threatened that if they were pro the Bidun nationalities, they would risk the revocation of their nationalities. There is a visionary, there would be an apparatus for the nationality in Kuwait to revoke to over 400,000 Kuwaiti national as a threatening means used by this person. So, in my personal perspective as a victim and as a researcher, it's not just about the misuse or mispractice of the authorities. We all love our countries, but there are some figures who misuse the authority and the power and the constitution for their own interests because they're mentally ill. So the misuse is against the national law and against the international law. It's an arbitrary practice. The most beneficiary of all these arbitrary actions is the Chamber of Commerce in Kuwait, and also the silence of some of NGOs or some of the international organizations headed by the United Nations, which know well of these practices but don't actually do any action towards it, as well as the silence and the approval of our own communities being silent about these practices or even participating or approving them effectively. In Kuwait, we have several classes who support the government and approve their practices due to their national or the plea of being national. And even if you ask them about the national identity, they have no idea what's the definition of the national identity. The final point I'd like to mention is the silence of the victims themselves and the Bidun community, and I understand that some persons, due to pressures, due to being risked or fear of risks, they're being silent. The victims are being silent, even they're not condemning that orally or verbally. I believe this is one of the main reasons also of the continuity of this problem. My personal perspective as a researcher or as a human being, due to my personal experience, we had a different perspective now. There is a problem in demanding the nationality in itself. Academic or scientific-wise, I think this is a problem because this tool could be exploited, could be misused by specific classes. So demanding it actually gives power to those people who take over it or have control over it. So I believe it's very important to separate the basic human rights from this regime, because if I allow any regime to decide for me any of my privileges, then my whole life would end. There should be a differentiation to take this tool away from controlling the human lives. I can't just, by pressing one button, canceling my whole life, affecting the life of me, my children, probably over a tweet. This is a huge problem. Even today, after I obtained a nationality, after being deprived of it or being revoked of it, if they gave me the nationality back, how will my political opinion change? I would be subject because I have been deprived of this. and I would fear
أستاذ أحمد أنا أعتذر شوي لأن تجاوزت 10 دقائق وعندي 4 دقائق فقط.
I only have 4 more minutes to end this webinar.
بس يبدو طولنا ساعتين.
And it was supposed to be an hour and a half, but we lasted for 2 hours. Does anyone has a final comment or any question by the followers through the direct link? Does anyone have any comments? Ladies and gentlemen, participants in the webinar, do you have any further comments?
يبدو ما في تعليق. على أي حال
Seems we have no further comments.
احنا بعد طولنا عليكم بأن شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you for all the speakers. Thank all the speakers,
من السيدات والسادة النشطاء,
activists, human rights defenders, and also the victims of the nationality revocation or being deprived of the nationality بدون and others. In this webinar, headlined the prospects of revoking the nationality in Bahrain. It shall be published on the social media platforms. Special thanks to all the guests. In hopes we meet you in other events, other human rights events. Thank you. Good evening.